All right, so joining me now is Chuck Walter from Chatterbox Bearcats. If you haven't heard the podcast, it's new this season, I believe. This is the first time you guys have done it, but you're covering the Bearcats after each and every game, probably doing some other stuff in between. I've enjoyed it. It's been a good listen. Chuck, this podcast you're doing, you've picked a good year for it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, well, we started it during football season, so
Okay.
we didn't pick a good time for it there. Although when it bleeds, right? With how bad the season was, it is fun going out there and talking about a team that's absolutely abysmal as compared to a team that's, just 5-7 or whatever. Because then you have people coming in with the pitchforks, and you all have common ground. But yeah, basketball's been off to a great start. I think Wes Miller's doing a really good job with this UC team, and let's see if he can finally get it done. Last time the Cats were 7-0, it was 17-18. They went into Centos, they got blasted. So let's rewrite history. Let's finally get one at the toss.
The joke on the Musketeer Report message board, and I think social media across these two fan bases, is the Enquirer every year, right? Some column to the effect of the shootout has lost its luster, right?
Oh, yeah.
Are you with me that this year is the luster is back a little bit? Are you feeling some of the energy of past shootout days?
The luster's always back. Maybe to the national audience, no. We were talking about this off the screen. I lived in California for 3-4 years, and no one out there cares about college hoops. It's a completely different story than over here. But when you're talking diehard UC, diehard Muskie fans, it doesn't matter if Xavier wins 7 in a row and they're, 14.5-point favorites. Like, this is still the Super Bowl for both these teams. I know some Xavier fans may say Villanova is a bigger deal. I know some Cats fans may say Houston's a bigger deal, or back way when Louisville's a bigger deal. No, this is the biggest game on the schedule. It always will be.
Yeah, I hate when the fan bases do that. I hate that the fan bases get mad at each other for acting like it's a big deal that they play this game and they talk about their rival. It's like you look at any other rivalry throughout sports that's this big, and they're obsessed with each other. They talk about each other all the time. They like hating each other. It's part of the deal. And for whatever reason, UC fans and Xavier fans both there's a certain segment of the fan bases that want to act like you shouldn't care about this rivalry. I've never understood that. And I totally agree with you that the what makes this rivalry so great is the fact that we don't care what the rest of the world thinks about it for, 3 hours that day on whatever Saturday in December it is. These two fan bases are going to be absolutely locked in and losing their minds about this game, regardless of what their records are or any of the surrounding storylines.
I would imagine it's different for every era and how they grew up, but me growing up as a 90s kid, born in 92, shout out to all the 92ers out there. You grow up in the first 6-7 years of your life, 5-6 years of your life, as you're kind of being acquainted to sports, like Cincinnati's the much better team. I used to think Xavier was like a AAA team. They weren't even in the same league as UC. I was like, oh, Dad, why do they have the Xavier game on at Buffalo Wild Wings? Like, nobody cares about Xavier. And then over a certain point, Xavier takes down number 1 Cincinnati over and over. Then when you still feel like UC's the better program in the better conference for, the early part of the 2000s with Bob Huggins, they're still losing games, but they're close games. They went into Centos, and there was one year Nick Williams threw it away. There was the Lance Stevenson year where you thought they could have got it done in double overtime. There was Jihad Muhammad hitting the 3. There were like 4 or 5 games wedged in there back to back to back where it was like, all right, Cincinnati can't win this game, but they're still the better program. Then at a certain point, like 10 years ago, Xavier just started winning games by like 10, 20 points over Cincinnati consistently. This is a great stat. Cincinnati hasn't won 2 straight since 96. X has had a multi-game winning streak 6 times, including now 4 in a row. So at some point, Cincinnati's got to start winning some of these games. And that's what's so frustrating about it and why we can't stand Xavier so much, because there was a point in life where it was like, we're the clear-cut favorite in this rivalry. We're the big time. They're the team from the Atlantic 10. And then somewhere along the way, it just flipped to the point where, as of right now, all-time history, sure, it's Cincinnati. But, our lifetime, there's no question. Like, it's Xavier with what they've done the last decade.
Well, we'll let the two fan bases argue about which is the better team with the most prestige and history and all of that stuff and who's on top right now. But
prestige, if we're talking all time, yeah, the answer to that. I mean, it's Cincinnati. We're even talking last 50 years, Cincinnati, whatever it may be. But last 30, no question.
Yeah, like I said, I have no desire to get in these debates. They've already hashed them out much better than I can. What I am interested in is your thoughts on this year's team and this year's game, because I think we could be in for a good one. First of all, if you've been following UC at all, or even if you haven't, but you're in this area, the one thing you have definitely heard about by this point is Assis Bandago. It was the focus of Wes Miller, and really with the lighter non-conference schedule, it was really all we heard about in the local media when it came to this UC basketball team is, are they going to get Assis eligible? And then once he became eligible, it's now kind of, okay, what can he do? How are they going to implement him? And how are they going to use him? You've now seen him for a few games, and I don't think it's fair to say exactly what he is and what his future is going to look like on this team after just a few games. But what has he brought to this team, in your opinion?
He changes the game completely. Just standing there, just statue in the middle of the lane completely changes how teams play Cincinnati. The first couple games of the year before he was eligible, they were averaging maybe a block per game, maybe if that, maybe a half block per game through the first three. Assis comes in, and within 15 seconds, he swatted one into the fourth row of Fifth Third Arena. Like, that's what he brings you defensively. Offensively, can finish the lob, can really run the floor for a legit 7-footer. Only had one rebound in his last game, and this is someone that averaged 11 last year. He was an 11-11 kind of guy, double-double machine. So the fact that he hasn't gotten off to that start yet makes you wonder, like, what's going on? Why is he not grabbing rebounds? But by committee, man, Dan Skillings has really picked it up, rebounding the ball. He grabbed 12 the other day against Florida Gulf Coast. Victor Locken grabbed 9 in that game. They have some pretty physical guards. Like, Jizzle James isn't big by any means, but he's got that Hall of Fame running back DNA. It's Edgerrin James' son. His real name, Edgerrin James Jr., goes by Jizzle James. He's a really good freshman, one of the best freshman guards I've seen at Cincinnati in a long time. Locken's played outstanding, as I mentioned. When you have a starting lineup that features a 6'11" 4 and Victor Locken, and he's shooting like 50-something% from the three-point line. He went 5 of 6 one game. So this is a different Victor Locken than Xavier fans remember now that he's playing the 4. Assis, you're starting 5, 7-footer. Skillings, 6'7". He's in there at your 3 or 6'6", or John Newman, who's 6'6". Like, there is size on this team. And then you add in shooting. Seamus Lukosius, he can shoot. CJ Frederick can shoot it. So they have some guys that can knock down threes as well, pretty sure-handed. And then depth. The Bearcats have that too. Lukosius is coming off the bench. He was Butler's second leading scorer last year. Who else is coming off? You got Odi Oguama, who was a starter last year. He's coming off the bench. Dan Skillings, who put up a career-high 25 a couple games ago and has shown flashes of being their best player. He's coming off the bench. They have a legit, 5-man switcheroo, if you want to say it, to where you're not – if they got Jameel Reynolds back, who is ineligible, the Temple transfer, if he comes back before this game, which at this point I would imagine is not happening, but if somehow Dave Yost can free our other Bearcat, who's 6'9", then you have like a platoon situation where you have so many bodies, I don't know what you do with them. They haven't really beaten anyone, but they've kicked everyone's tail. They beat Georgia Tech by 30-something points. Howard's the only game that's been close, and that game was on the road. So as of right now, you want to see them do it against a good team, but based on the eye test, I think we're looking at a really good Cincinnati team.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of those guys for sure. But back to Assis real quick.
Sorry. You asked me about Assis, and I literally just went through the entire roster.
No, we're going to talk about all of them. Trust me. We're going to get into all those guys. Obviously, defensively, I think that this team is strong. At least when I look at them, I can see that the offensive and defensive numbers are both impressive right now when you look at the efficiency metrics on KenPom. But when I look at how they're built, and I'm trying to project this into the Big 12 and what they're going to look like the rest of the year, to me, the defense is legit. The athleticism of the defense is clearly legit. And I think Assis being added to that has solidified it without question. I guess for you, I want to know, on the offensive side, how much of a difference has Assis made there, do you think?
When it comes to, let's just go back 48 hours ago or whatever it may be when they were playing Florida Gulf Coast, getting the days mixed up here. But anyways,
play on the tip off.
Opening play. Yeah. 4 seconds in, Day Thomas gets it 5 feet behind the line, looks up the floor, fires it up there to Assis, who flushes it.
Well,
And
the best part about it was a called set play. They ran up and screened Aziz's man as the tip off was going. I mean,
oh yeah,
this was a beautiful set thing. I've seen a few other teams run that this year,
Houston,
and he's like the
Houston will do that.
perfect player to use for that situation.
Yeah, Houston did that against Cincinnati a couple times when UC was playing in Houston and lost by about 30 points. That's how the game would start. So Wes Miller drew that up from Kelvin Sampson, I would imagine, worked to perfection. The first play that Aziz was in there against Georgia Tech, after the block shot was a lob that he threw down. So I really like Simas Lukosius, who's kind of a surgeon, takes his time, but can get into the middle, and that's where it really opens up Aziz. Or if, he can consistently hit the floater, which he hasn't yet. If he consistently hit that 8-foot floater, it's like pick your poison. Do you want to go after Aziz, or do you want to come up and get a hand in Lukosius's face? And that can be lethal right there. As far as his post moves and turnaround, I mean, we haven't seen a ton of it. Hit a few of them. Hasn't showed any sort of outside game, although he did hit some threes with Utah Valley. So I think he has that in his arsenal. He just is not being asked to do that right now. But I'm just really impressed with the way he runs the floor. I mean, he's 7 foot and fast. That's not David Narsuk running down the floor. Like he's a nimble 7-foot guy.
No, and he looks like he could run all day too. I mean, there's no like conditioning concerns or anything like that with a guy like him. He's very light on his feet. I mentioned, offensive efficiency, 32nd in the country right now. Defense, 30th. You heard what I said. I see, in my opinion, an identity forming with this team, which is the athleticism and length that they have on the defensive end. Do you agree with me that that's going to become their identity, or do you feel like they're more balanced than that, and maybe it will be more of like an offensive run and gun team like they're showing, scoring 100 points right now in some of these non-conference games?
Yeah, it's hard to say based on the competition. One thing that I know is even when you watched UC teams in the past and they overpowered teams with their skill, the offense was never really a thing of beauty. It was always a lot of passing around the arc, offensive rebounds, shooting a lot of threes, whatever it may be. They have really good spacing right now and a lot of different guys that can beat you in different ways. When I was mentioning the entire roster earlier, pretty much during my question that you asked me about Aziz Bandego, like they have shooters. They have guys that can get into the lane, like Day Thomas. That's what he does. And Lukosius, I think, can get in there. And, Frederick, the sharpshooter. So I think they can have the identity that just kind of molds to the competition that they're playing. The one thing that does scare me is that Houston's still going to be too physical for this team.
But Houston's too physical for everybody. So
that's what I'm saying. Like Houston and some of those big teams are going to be a little too physical. And maybe, I'm a little too hyped with Victor Locke and Bandego right now. And Bandego, skinny guy, maybe he can't stack up with some of those teams that have a bruiser down low. That's the one thing that UC's missing, and what Jameel Reynolds would give you if he was eligible, but I wouldn't expect him to play in the Xavier game. But aside from that, I feel like they can do a little bit of everything depending on how they rotate these lineups. They can go small. They can play a 4-guard offense with Skillings at the 4. So I don't know if they're going to be that big physical team. That's the one thing that I don't think they would be, but I do think they're going to be balanced offensively and defensively, and have shown abilities to be a really good on the ball defensive team with their quick point guards. Although young, we'll see if they can do it in conference play. And then just big guards in general. Like John Newman he's long, he's pretty strong, and he's really good on the ball. Really their only weakness is that shooting guard position. If you're talking Lukosius and CJ Frederick, neither of those guys seem like someone that's going to consistently stay in front of their defenders. But that is where the first question, when you asked about Aziz Bandego, that's where he comes into the mix, because you get past him and literally one of the best shot blockers in the entire country. I don't think that's a stretch to say is waiting in the middle.
You were talking about the team's lack of a big bruiser inside. And earlier you were also talking about, though, they've rebounded the ball really well. When you look at offensive rebounding percentages, they're 22nd in the country. Defensive rebounding percentage, they're 3rd in the country. Is that a surprise to you? Or looking at this team prior to coming into the year, would that have been a surprise to you that they're rebounding it so well?
Yeah, but I'm just looking: Illinois, Chicago, Detroit, Mercy, Eastern Washington, Northern Kentucky, Howard, Florida Gulf Coast, Georgia Tech. Like, they should be out rebounding these teams. They're bigger,
sure.
So
Yeah.
we'll see when they play a legitimate big time team like Xavier, although they looked fine against Georgia Tech. I will say this though, forget size. I mean, you could throw that out. There have been multiple games this year where UC's shot it above 50% and hit, I think against Georgia Tech, it may have been 15 and 29 from deep. And in their last game against Florida Gulf Coast, 11 and 19. That's a team that's not going to lose many games if you're good defensively, if you can shoot like that. What scares me in this game is Centos Center. UC always starts off cold. It's Xavier 10-2 at the first media timeout, and it's 20 points at some point in the first half. So UC's got to get off to a fast start, but I do think they have some balance to where even if the shots aren't going in, you pull Frederick, you get him out of there. You bring in, Lukosius, you bring in Dan Skillings instead of Newman, and you really try to attack the basket and get it done in a different way. And Locken's been a constant this year. He's been one thing that, aside from his first game of the year, that hasn't changed. He's been stellar. Hopefully it stays that way.
Would you say he's been their best player to this point, or would you
have
another answer?
Yeah, no doubt. I think Skillings would probably be number 2. And then I'd say Aziz may be the most important just because of how he changed the team. I mean, game 1 against Illinois Chicago, maybe not against Detroit Mercy just because it was a 30-point whooping, and Detroit Mercy really, really stinks. But against Illinois Chicago, like, they were getting to the rim with ease. Odie at the 4 and Vic at the 5 was just like, this is going to be gross in the Big 12. And just that one player coming in defensively and sliding 6'11" Vic Lock into the 4, and now he has this shooting ability to where he's hit, a 3-pointer in almost every game this year. And he's had a 5 3-point effort. Like, it changed the team completely to the point where that's rim protection is one of the things that they do really well. Like, I don't see teams taking it down low. Now I did see Florida Gulf Coast big guy back up Aziz Bandego a couple times and shoot over him. So if Xavier has any of those big bruisers down low, maybe that's where they get a big time advantage. But other than that, I mean, bad competition, I mean, they're not playing anyone, but the eye test, I've watched a lot of basketball the last few years, and it's clearly the best team they've had in at least 5 years.
One of the other question marks I would have had, like, rebounding would have been a question coming into the year. I'm impressed by how well they've done with that. Point guard would have been another question for me, not because I didn't necessarily like the guys that they brought in, but typically when your only answers for point guard are a junior college player who's making the jump up and hasn't played at all yet, and he's going to be playing the Big 12 for the first time, and a freshman, there are question marks and there's legit concerns to be had. You look at the way Cincinnati has played so far, and granted that you got to take it with a grain of salt because of the competition, but their turnover percentage ranks 10th in the country on offense. They're scoring a lot of points. It seems like they're getting into their offense well. The ball's moving around well. How would you assess the point guard play between Day Thomas and Jizzle James to this point?
I thought that when those two were brought in and Micah Adams-Woods decided to transfer to St. Bonaventure, it was really telling to me that, something was going on behind the scenes, whether Wes was keeping it honest and told Micah, you're going to have a serious competition, whatever it may be. I thought that was good news, because the fact that he had faith to let Micah walk, because I think it was, somewhat of a mutual decision there. And Micah wouldn't have went to St. Bonaventure after being a starting point guard for 3 years at Cincinnati, entering the Big 12. Like, why would you do that unless the two guys coming in, Wes thought could outplay them? And they have. I mean, this is a nice little 1A, 1B, two-headed, I wouldn't call them monster, but two-headed attack that Cincinnati has right now. A lot of speed from both of them. Pretty physical and athletic. I'd say Jizzle more physical. Day-Day's probably a little more explosive, it seems like, with the way that he can get up and throw down. But really quick, both good on-the-ball defenders. Day-Day's made some head-scratching plays, which you would think would be more from the freshman. But Jizzle's been great. I think that at some point this season, and to answer your question, you said, what would what would be the word that describes these point guards? I would say solid and trending upwards, because Day to start this season was the guy. He's your starting point guard coming in from a JUCO. Looked really good the first couple of games of the season. And then the last few, it's not that he's looked bad. It's that Jizzle's carved out, 3-4 extra minutes every game. from like 10 minutes to 18 minutes in his last game because he's just been really solid. And I think he's going to take the job at some point. Good mid-range. Does not look like a freshman out there. Like he'll check in and immediately just take it right to the basket. My old CYO coach at Cardinal Pacelli, Bill Barrett, would have been furious. He was 5 passes before you shoot, fellas. Jizzle will just go in there. He'll take it up the floor. You know, it's like that point guard in 4th grade where you just, you know, take it right to the rack. No passes 4 seconds into a possession. That's a freshman doing that. So he's fearless, not afraid to take some step back jumpers. His 3 leaves a lot to be desired, but I think he is the better player than Day Thomas at this current moment. And I think he'll continue to get better throughout his freshman year. And he's going to be their starting point guard at some point. I don't know if that's the hottest take in the world, but I think it's the right take personally because
I think it's interesting too because I don't think Day Thomas has been bad at all.
He's been really good. I think
him.
I think Jizzle's just gonna. I think he's gonna take the job. Like he is super physical. Sometimes you're worried that freshmen just don't have the body and the strength. Like that's his strong suit. Like he's got that Edgerrin James DNA. He wears the wrist bicep sleeves.
I do love the really thin wristbands on the biceps, like we're back in the early 2000s playing wide receiver. I mean, he has the football look to him going on. It's great.
Yeah, and he's a little out of control at times. And like I said, his 3 hasn't been special by any means, but he can get to the basket. He grabbed, I think, 6 rebounds and dished out like 4 assists in his last game. So he's got some good balance. This isn't a team that's turned it over a ton. There have been some years in the past 5, that they've turned it over 17, 18 times a game. It felt like, I have not really noticed aside from Skillings here and there and, a few bad plays from those 2 point guards just being out of control. I really haven't noticed any turnovers. Like Newman's solid with it. Victor Locken's been great. He's been an excellent passer to start this year. And then, all the other guys too. I mean, Frederick's not really turning it over.
And I think that's where like you've really seen CJ Frederick and Simas Lukosius show up is with their experience and their skill and their IQ. The guys aside from the 2 point guards really are committing almost no turnovers within the flow of the offense. And that's certainly helped the team keep that overall number down. So we've talked about a lot of good things here with this UC team and rightfully so with the way they've played to this point. If you're nitpicking, if you mentioned, maybe they lack an interior big who's real physical, that could be a concern. Are there any other weaknesses right now, though, that you see with this team?
I don't know if they have enough shooters. I think it's a little bit of a misleading stat right now. I think they've gotten hot in a few of these games. Frederick, when he knocks down 4 or 5, is dangerous. I do think Simas is better than his percentage says right now. I want to say it's under like 33%.
Xavier fans would agree with that.
Yeah, I think he's a better shooter than that. So those 2 consistently can knock it down. But I think John Newman shot it better than he's going to shoot this year. He's hovering around 40%. I don't think he's a 40% 3-point shooter. Dan Skillings isn't a great shooter by any means. Josh Reed's not a great shooter. Victor Locken, yes, he's been knocking him down, but history shows that he's not going to shoot at 65% all year. So
well, it's also like if you're in the heat of a Big 12 game, do you want your offense that you're relying on to be Victor Locken shooting 3s?
Yeah, Victor Locken. Right? Day Thomas hasn't looked great shooting the ball. Jizzle James hasn't looked excellent. So yeah, they're 15 of 29 against Georgia Tech or 11 of 19 in their last game, but you saw it against Howard. They went 3 of 18. They weren't knocking down shots. Howard was knocking down shots. And Cincinnati, who could get whatever they wanted inside, almost lost that game because, when shots aren't falling, I think that they're a very beatable team. So the question becomes, like, how good of a shooting team are they if they only have 2 consistent shooters that I think can really knock them down at above a 35% clip? But as of right now, there are some numbers that I feel like are a little bit skewed that could go down to earth, or Victor Locken could shoot at 40% from deep. That could be a skill that he just has. And that's the main part of his game moving forward is he just steps out and knocks down 3s. Like Gary Clark kind of figured that out in his career at some point and became a pretty respectable 3-point shooter. And it changed his game.
Yeah. Well, I told you I was going to ask you too much about Xavier's players on this podcast, but I want to run through just real quick some of these matchups. And I don't know how much you've seen Xavier, but maybe you can give me whatever thoughts you have and I'll kind of share mine as well. At the point guard position, you got Day Thomas versus Davion McKnight. I think this is a pretty close matchup. I don't see like a huge edge either way. If I'm leaning, I'm probably leaning towards Day Thomas, but I don't think that's like a standout matchup to me where I'm looking for a huge edge on either side. I don't know if you have any thoughts on the point guard matchup there.
I don't know a ton about McKnight. I remember I covered him in high school when he played in Kentucky. Saw him in the state tournament, but no, he went to Western Kentucky. I would say, yeah, you're probably right in the fact that we'll see.
Yeah, and I feel similar about the shooting guard situation if we're talking CJ Frederick, because he is starting right now. Now, obviously, a lot of times that first substitution comes in and it's Dan Skilling's at the shooting guard position, who I would make the argument might be their best player even over Victor Locken right now. And then you bring in Simas Lukosius at the forward spot for one of the two big men, depending on how they're doing that. So there is an early substitution here. But if we're going CJ Frederick versus Quincy Oliveri, I feel pretty similarly there. Obviously, CJ Frederick's coming off the huge shooting performance against Florida Gulf Coast, but prior to that, he really hadn't been shooting all that well, hadn't given them a ton offensively. Quincy Oliveri's been playing pretty well for Xavier, but again, I'm not sure if he's the guy that's going to be the difference over CJ Frederick in a crosstown shootout matchup. So that's another one where I'm not too excited either way. I may lean more towards Quincy Oliveri.
Frederick has been boom or bust, feast or famine, whatever you want to call it. When he feasts, he hits 4 or 5 and does it at like an 80% clip. You know, he goes 4 or 5, or he goes 5 or 6. When he misses his first two and he gets pulled, sometimes they just ride the hot hand and you don't see him until late in the game. 15 minutes will pass and you don't really see CJ Frederick in there because he's not creating a ton of his own shots. He's knocking down threes. And when you catch him in rhythm, or you have a team that's playing you a little bit differently defensively, and he could somehow leak open, or it's more of a transition game where he can get open that way, you stick him in there and you ride his hot hand. But if Xavier plays him a certain way, there are certain games where he's just not going to be a big part of the offense because he's not creating it. And if you're not giving him space, at some point it's like, all right, we got too many guys on our bench to leave someone out there that, has only taken one shot and is not a top tier defender.
Right. At the small forward spot, John Newman versus Desmond Claude. And this is the first matchup where I really see an important situation going on, because Desmond Claude to me is clearly a bigger talent, potentially a huge advantage for Xavier here. But John Newman has been playing really well, and defensively he can be a stopper. And if he locks Desmond Claude up, then all of a sudden Xavier's in a world of hurt, I think, on the offensive side, because they really need Desmond Claude to give them an advantage in this matchup. So this is one I'm really looking at as I think it should be advantage Xavier, but I would be really worried about how this one goes if I'm a Xavier fan.
John Newman's just smooth. You mentioned how good he is defensively. He reminds me, and he's a lefty. He reminds me of another lefty that played for UC. You'll recognize this name. He's like Rashad Bishop. Just if X fans remember Rashad Bishop, that's kind of how he plays. He's smooth.
Not quite as big and tough.
No,
but more athletic.
Not as big, but more athletic. And I would argue that he's pretty tough. I mean, for his size, it's 6'5". Well, like
let me be clear. I'm only saying not as tough because I would put Rashad Bishop on the very short list of humans that you never want to run into in a dark alley. Like Rashad Bishop is elite toughness out of any college basketball player I've ever seen. So
yeah, and he was excellent defensively, doing it against Big East guys day in day out. One of the best defenders in the league. We'll see if Newman
and he was guarding like power forwards, not just perimeter players too.
Yeah, he was guarding like Jeff Adrian from UConn. And
then the next night it'd be a shooting guard or a point or something.
DeJuan Blair from he's guarding DeJuan Blair from Pittsburgh. So yeah, John Newman, not that in that sense, but the guy that can, he can knock down some threes, doesn't really turn the ball over. I'd say he could throw down a lot better than Bishop. There'll be some plays, and there have been this year, where Newman takes it down the lane and you're just expecting maybe a little floater, or he's going to fade from the bucket, and he'll just go right into a defender and tomahawk it. Which I did not know he could really do before this year. We saw it once in like a Wichita State game a few years ago, but yeah, he's got some ups, can throw down. And when he's knocking down a few threes, he's someone that can give you 10 and 5. Not much more than that. I wouldn't expect, John Newman to go for 20 anytime this year, but that's not who the Cats need him to be.
Right. And on the flip side of that, Desmond Claude, that is who Xavier needs him. Xavier needs him to be the go-to player for them. All right, now we get into the side for UC. Victor Locken versus Gitas Nemesha. You've talked about how well Victor's been playing. A lot of UC fans, I think, would argue that he is their best player right now, and that's certainly a reasonable argument. Giedis has been good at times for Xavier, certainly, but you also have to look at that Houston matchup where he got absolutely dominated by a Horizon League forward and gave up, about half of those 28 points that Trey Townsend scored and really had no answer physically inside defensively for him. If I'm a Xavier fan, I look at that and I am very concerned now heading into this matchup against Victor Locken based off of that Oakland matchup. Now, maybe it was a fluke, and granted, he's been better defensively in some other games, certainly, but that was enough to scare me about what Xavier can do defensively in the front court against Victor Locken.
Yeah, Locken's really skilled. I mentioned his newfound ability to hit the three, back to the basket or facing. He can, he has some post moves, some finesse, and he's shown the ability to have really good vision and has been an assist guy to start out this year, and has no doubt been their best player. Physically, I don't think he's going to dominate many teams, physically. It's more with his quickness and size, the combination of that, and a little bit of finesse around the rim as well. So if you're afraid that he's going to, back you down and out tough you, I don't think that's the type of player Victor has been. And I think you'll see that once the competition starts picking up a little bit. I think he has feasted a little bit on teams that are much smaller and their fours are 6'7", 6'8", instead of, 6'10", whatever it may be. Honestly, I have no idea who you're talking about. With the,
yeah, he's a Lithuanian transfer. Yes,
this entire Xavier team, man, like Boom's gone, Kunkel's gone, Nunji's gone. I don't see Fremantle out there. Like, I don't recognize any of these guys. Like Claude, I mean, I heard the name last year, but I don't really remember him being a big part of the team. It's like I don't recognize any of these guys. So who knows what to expect from my perspective.
Yeah, it's tough if you have not watched basically every Xavier game so far this year to start to get a feel for some of these foreigners and the freshmen that are playing a lot. It is a brand new Xavier team. Desmond Claude, the only returner from last year's roster that's playing minutes. And like you said, he was a freshman who was coming off the bench last year and not playing a ton. So it's a brand new team. The last matchup we have inside, again, another guy you're going to know nothing about from the Xavier side, Sasha Shani, a international big man who's a freshman, going up against Aziz Bandago. And we've already talked a lot about him, what he means to this UC team, how much he has changed them. That's another situation where I think it's a big advantage for UC. Xavier, I think, really has to hope that this doesn't become, defensively, I think you know what Aziz is going to be no matter what. I think the other end, you have to hope it doesn't become like Aziz scores 15 points on that end of the court as well, and Sasha gets you nothing. Because if you get destroyed at both the 4 and the 5 position, it's going to be a real problem for X.
Do we have 4 different nations being represented in the paint in this game?
Yes.
I mean, so no Americans down low. It's just, it's a battle of all the foreign guys.
Well, and that's not even including CMOS.
Yeah, true.
You had another one in there.
What was the question again? I was just thinking about the fact like that.
Really
that's crazy to me.
Yeah, just mentioning the front court is where I guess overall from your perspective, and again, I know you really probably don't have much of an idea about all these Xavier guys, but I think UC's advantage in this game clearly lies in the front court. The 2 front court guys, that's what I'm looking at. And on the flip side, if you're Xavier and you're hoping to gain advantage, you're hoping Desmond Claude's able to go against John Newman and have a big night. Because the one thing about UC that I think we've seen is defensively, they don't seem to want to help a lot. It's like they kind of want to play one-on-one. You make a tough shot over us one-on-one, but we're going to stay on our shooters. We're not going to give you wide open threes because we helped off a guy too much. We're not going to give you easy kickouts because we doubled down in the post. We think our guys can defend one-on-one. So maybe that's what you're looking at as Xavier is just Desmond Claude on John Newman, hoping he has a big game against UC's top defender.
Yeah, down low. It doesn't seem like they've run a lot of offense through the bigs. It's not, let's get the offense started with a Aziz touch. I feel like it's more getting guys open around the perimeter, getting into the lane. And that's where they have that option with Aziz either going up top or a lot of mid-range. Actually, team I feel like hasn't had many mid-range jumpers at all because they're getting to the bucket. But it's been a nice mix so far to where just because what I said earlier with the size difference so far, like I don't know what to expect down low. I'm not thinking that this is going to be a team that gives it to Aziz 12 times a game and asks him to make some moves on the post. I know he can do that. I saw him do it at Utah Valley. I've seen highlights of him having some post moves. I just think the guards are the best players on this team. And Locken, I'm counting him as a guard here because he's playing outside of the perimeter a lot too this year. When he does do a lot of his work down low, it's, facing the basket, not as much back to the basket like he's been doing in years past. Oguama gives you that back to the basket only look with Aziz, but Oguama hasn't been playing that much. So it comes down to me. You may think it's the bigs. I think it comes down to shooting. If Cincinnati only hits 3 or 4 threes in this game and they take a lot of them, Xavier's going to have plenty of chances to win, regardless of what the bigs do down low. I just do think that the stats are a little bit skewed because of how small of teams Cincy has played so far.
I would agree with that. The other part I would say about the shooting is I don't think either of these teams are great shooting teams. Xavier certainly isn't. UC's numbers, like you said, I think look a little bit better than they probably are against quality competition. So in my opinion, I'm expecting like 3 to 4 threes from each of these teams, and it's going to be an ugly shooting night on both sides, and it's going to come down to other things. And that's where I go. I think if you're a Xavier fan and they heard what you just said, which is it's going to come down to the guard play and perimeter play, I think Xavier fans feel a lot more optimistic if that's the case, quite honestly, because I think where you're worried right now is, as a Xavier fan, is how does your young or inexperienced front court hold up against quality big men? And this is one of the first set of quality big men you're really going to face.
Well, I'll say this. I have no idea what to expect. I mean, Locken could come out there and score 20 points, and I think Aziz could go out there and score, 16 points in this game. Like, I do think they have capabilities of being really good big men. I just have to see it against the better competition. Like, Aziz was playing Portland State last year, whoever is in their conference, and Locken was getting bullied by a lot of the teams in the American. Like, could Locken have flipped a switch in this offseason and this is just who he is? He's an 18-8 kind of guy every single game. Maybe, but I just have to see it against someone that wasn't Georgia Tech in a game where Cincy went on a 32-5 run to bust it open, and it was never a game 10 minutes into it or whatever. Like, I think there's somewhere in between a 35-point win or 40-point win, whatever it was, over Georgia Tech in that overtime game against Howard. But they've been consistent, and I would not be shocked if Cincy went out there and it was like, damn, Locken and Bandego is quite the 1-2 punch down low. I just want to see it first in a big time game. And when one of those two goes out and Oguama comes in, like, I don't think Oguama is going to be dominating the Xavier bigs by any means. So foul trouble hasn't come into play yet this year, but Locken was in foul trouble all the time last year. So we'll see if that becomes an issue in this one, because, that, especially on the road, like, that completely changes a game when you pick up that second foul with 16:30 in the first half. And it's like, all right, it's Josh Reed time and it's Odi Oguama time at the 4.
Yeah, and that is Xavier's offense. I mean, Xavier's offense is designed to essentially accumulate fouls, and that effect plays out over the course of the game. It's like first half, it may look ugly, but all of a sudden, like you said, a guy's on the bench earlier than he should be because he has 2 fouls and he's not playing as many minutes. And then he's a little bit more timid when he gets back in there and it starts to open things up and you're in the bonus earlier. So that's definitely going to be a big part of what Xavier's trying to do in this game.
That's what's nice about this Cincy team is if they did go that route, and it's nothing against Odie. I think he's a good player and he's going to find his minutes. No doubt about it at many points this year, but I would not mind seeing a smaller lineup where you put Aziz in there at the 5 if Locken were to get in foul trouble, and have Newman and Skillings in there at the same time at the 3 and the 4, and see if
Lukosius at the 4. I mean, he played the 4 Butler so often. They've done that a few times already.
Or Lukosius, and just spread the floor and go a little smaller and dribble drive and see if you can't get Aziz for some oops or, finishing some easy ones with your athleticism, getting out in transition. Jizzle and Day have been able to push it. They play lightning quick. So that's the nice thing about this UC team is they can play different ways. Like last year, it was as simple as, hey, if David DeJulius isn't hitting shots, if Landers Nolly's not hitting shots, and if Victor Locken's in foul trouble, like, what are you going to do? You're going to pass the ball around the perimeter and run one of the worst offenses you've ever seen until Davenport, throws up a 32-footer. Adams Woods gets into the lane and can't get it off or whatever it may be. So there's just more talent this year. I think Xavier fans are going to see that. Look, I've said that 7 of the last 10 games, I'm like, this is the year since he's getting it done. It's Cintas Center, and many times they've been close. And I thought afterwards that they, if they tipped it up again, that they could have got it done. But this is the year where it's like, and I think every UC fan feels it. And I got the wood all around me that I'll knock on as I broke something in the background there. But this is the year they got to get it done, man. Like they're clearly, based off the eye test, the little bits that I've watched of Xavier, they're clearly, if not the better team, the favorite heading into this game. I think you'll see that with the spread. If the bookmakers were smart, they'd probably put this at a UC -1 or an even line just based off history alone. But I think
I was wondering, what do you think that's going to be? Because Ken Pom has it right now, Xavier 75, UC 74. Ken Pom's usually almost right in line with whatever Vegas is doing, but Vegas sometimes will play in a little more the factor of like, for instance, if you set this line, I think at UC -1 at a road game against Xavier, probably the entire betting public who knows nothing about either team is going to go, I'm going to get bet Xavier because they're the home team, right? So like, do you have to make Xavier a slight favorite here just from a betting perspective, do you think? Or do you think UC is going to be favored? I've been going back and forth on this. I really don't know what they're going to do.
When you bring up Ken Pom, I mean, that would make me think that -1 seems reasonable.
Xavier -1.
Yeah, or just putting it at even, or Cincinnati -1. Maybe the line fluctuates a little.
You think we go pick them for the shootout? That would be fun.
I wouldn't mind a pick 'em.
I love the idea of a pick 'em for the shootout.
Get those even odds for a clearly superior team right now. I think if you've watched Cincy, even against Howard, like Howard was shooting out of their minds, and they were playing well in those road games at the beginning of the year, and those bad gyms with the bad broadcast and everything. Like sometimes it just
I don't know that the twerking on the broadcast was the issue UC had on offense in that game, although I did appreciate it. I did enjoy watching that. Howard isn't the game I would probably use as an example of why UC's been good this year. I'll say that. But aside from that game, I do think they've been really impressive.
Yeah, they were missing shots. They didn't defend well in that game, but Howard hit tough shots. And at the end of the day, good teams win games. It's as simple as that. There are plenty of UC teams that would have lost that game. Came back down the stretch, got it done. Whenever they went up 5-6, Howard would make the run back, and they just kept fending them off. And that's what good teams do. So I think Cincy going into it is the superior team. I think they have more talent. I think they have more talent that's played together, a little more continuity. Lockins, this is his 3rd year in basketball, his 4th year in the program. Frederick's got, 5 years of playing basketball. Granted, Xavier has those graduate transfers too, so it's not that much different there. But I do think in terms of, Newman playing a year with some of these guys, and Skilling's now playing a year, they have a little more continuity and veteran leadership to where I'd say Cincy probably should be. I think 70%, 65% of the bets, if it was a pick 'em,
like if this game is a neutral, if this is a neutral site game, I think Cincinnati should be a 2.5 3-point favorite. I would say.
Based on, but it's also tough to gauge because Xavier's played one of the best schedules in the country. UC's played no one. That's got to be advantage Xavier, right? They've already been in some tough spots. They had to deal with Houston's size. They've taken the notes. You play better teams, you get better. It's as simple as that. Like Cincinnati's, they're running around with Florida Gulf Coast, Eastern Washington, Detroit Mercy, Illinois, Chicago. They're looking impressive in the process, and it's a no contest with all these teams from the opening tip. But it's got to be tough creating the spread because you have no idea. I could see Cincy running away with it, winning by 13. I could see them not being ready for this game physically. Xavier getting all they can, anything they want essentially against the two UC bigs that, haven't really shown that they can do it against big time teams because Bandego's never really had the opportunity.
All right. So assuming all of this is true, this is UC's best chance they've had in a few years. Wes Miller, I think you'll agree, needs to win a big game. I mean, you go back to the Illinois game that first year, that was a game he probably wasn't supposed to win that he won. But since then, not a lot of games that you can look to and go, that was a big win. And maybe this isn't one he's not supposed to win, but it's a big win in the rivalry game. Obviously, it would go a long way towards how the fans feel about where this thing is headed. What does this game mean for Wes Miller, in your opinion? I mean, this is a big one, right?
Yeah, it's massive. If they come out and lay an egg and can't hit a shot, and some of these guys look timid that were so smooth to start the year, and there's more of that passing it around the perimeter that we've seen in years past in the Bearcats and step back 3-pointers. Because I've seen some of those shots from Newman already this year. Maybe when the competition gets stiffer, they don't have as much of ease getting into the lane and finding Bandego. And that's what terrifies me, is that everything we've seen right now is just a byproduct of who UC has played. And, they're still better than last year. I think they're still a good team. How good, we have no idea. And that's why it's so big for Wes Miller, because the vibe of the season completely changes if you go out, lay an egg, lose by 15 to a Xavier team that's 4-4 and has already lost how many games at Cintas Center. It's not like an unwinnable place like it's been in years past. It would make it 5 losses in a row. It would make Wes Miller, who said in his opening press conference, we're going to kick their butts. We're going to go into Xavier and we're going to kick their behinds. And I think that's the exact quote that he said. He did not use any profanities.
That's
he
true.
said we're gonna whoop their butts. If he goes 0-3 and loses this one, I mean, it makes next year like, all right, you got to win that one, or we're not even talking about a rivalry anymore. At this point, they're laughing at us over at Dana's Garden. Like, come on now. He's got to win this one for that reason alone, and get that marquee. Even though it's really not a marquee non-conference win, it'll probably be quad 2 when it's all said and done, just by winning a game on the road. And Xavier's going to sneak some wins out in the Big East. They're not going to be a sub 500 team. They've had just a brutal schedule, but he's got to get it. He's got to get it for the vibe of all Cats fans. We've been waiting forever. The last time they won a shootout at Cintas, it was, I think AIM was definitely a thing. Facebook wasn't around. It was,
BRB.
I was in 3rd grade, man. I was in 3rd grade. Look at me. I'm a grown man.
What was your AIM screen name?
I'm a grown man. It was my AIM screen name was CW Bala 93. Yeah. So we got the BALLA. It was around like Chingy had all his, big Bala, and like that was a big brand back then. So I had to throw the Bala in the screen name.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I think mine was Booyah 34. So
okay.
There you go. A little Stuart Scott shout out, RIP. Chuck, listen, really enjoy the podcast. It's Chatterbox Bearcats. If you want to go check it out, I assume you guys will have something up here ahead of the shootout as well. People can go check out.
Yeah, we're gonna do a little preview show. Depending on when you're listening to this, it may already be out. So check that out. We have fun with it. We let it rip. I didn't know if we were allowed to let it rip on this podcast or whatever, but we say whatever we feel like on it. I don't have any of the big wigs signing the paychecks anymore. So Chatterbox, they give you the autonomy, which I really like, to just kind of go out there and talk like you're in a bar with your buddies. So we have fun with it. Really cut it up. Love the Cats. It's as simple as that, and really gives me something to look forward to when the final buzzer sounds. Although, it may not be as fun when they start losing games, because it's coming at some point. You're not, going 29-1 in today's college basketball. So we're going to have some losing ones soon, but as long as they can get one against Xavier, I mean, that's a season made right there. You got to win this one.
All right. Well, that is why I enjoy the show. I like, I don't need the radio magic. I don't need the broadcaster voices and all the fake stuff. I like you guys giving your actual opinions, and it's a good listen. So check it out. Chatterbox Bearcats. Chuck, I kept you way longer than I said I was going to. I do apologize for that, but thank you. It was really good stuff.
All good, man. Go Bearcats.